Hello and thanks for joining me. Let's chat for a bit about H Plus Incorporated by Gary Dejean, which is the most recent book that I finished. I did read this book electronically, and the cover here with this backlit iPad does not want to show up well on this on film here. But yeah, there is the title, there is the cover. H Plus Incorporated by Gary Dejean. Following this chat, I will also touch base briefly on what I'm currently reading, so stay tuned for that. But for now, let's chat about H Plus Incorporated. So from what I could tell, this book was published last year in 2018. I decided to read it because it sounded sort of cyberpunky and also concerned the topic of transhumanism, which is a topic that I find, really interesting because it's the way that humans are going to be able to change ourselves as we engage with technology, biotechnology as well as artificial intelligence and prosthesis and things like this, where will gain the ability in the relatively near future to change ourselves beyond anything that we've been able to do as a species before. This topic is explored extensively by Yuval Noah Harari, who is an author that I've read several of his books. I chatted Sapiens and Homo Deus previously, which I will link to below. He has a book out right now called 21 Questions for the 21st Century, which I have not read, but he has done quite a few chats, or not chats, but he's done talks around the world, which have been filmed and put on YouTube. And he thinks that one of the main challenges of humanity in the 21st century will actually be this topic of, how we're going to be able to change ourselves and how technology and artificial intelligence may be, may impact us as a species this century. So he also has said in some of his talks that he feels like science fiction, the genre of science fiction, is the genre that explores this topic the best right now, where it actually presents to the general public how, what these questions are and how humans might respond to these questions. So this particular book doesn't really ask these kinds of big questions. It's really basically a thriller, but or an adventure. But it still concerns this topic. So I found it really interesting. So what it's about, what this particular book's about, is our main characters are David, who has a son Jake. Jake has had some kind of accident, and he is now in basically a robotic body. This is the near future. I believe it's set in 2039, so it's the relatively near future. It is in Manila, which has become this crossroads of a wild capitalism, with sort of a free-for-all capitalism in this world of the near future that is also impacted heavily by climate change as well as social disruptions due to the changing technology, where there's a lot of people that have been displaced by technology economically, and so there's a lot of social unrest. And so we find ourselves in this Manila of 2039 with David and his son Jake, who I forget how old he is, but he's like a young boy who has been put into this sort of robotic body. Well, we might expect that in this sort of transition era where this technology is not real widespread yet, and so there's varying levels of acceptance among other people, with people with prosthesis, as well as someone like Jake, who is now in a totally robotic body. And so David and Jake, I think they're having some issues with adjustment, and so they go to this sort of, I gathered it was kind of like a discussion group or a support group with people that have had other people who have prosthesis and things. And they meet this journalist there whose name is Chloe. And she's an investigative journalist, and from what I could gather, she's really in this world of people who are really hacking the human system, and she's part of that world. And she's also really an anti-government, not really anti-government, but the government of the time also, I should say, I gathered rather oppressive and maybe authoritarian because of the social unrest and whatnot. So anyway, they meet up with her as well as some other people in the support group, and they end up hanging out. These people have sort of a hangout where they all hang out and they sort of tinker with technology and things like that. And they David, Jake, the son, David sort of likes the fact that Jake has found these people because, of course, he can relate to them much better, and so they wind up sort of forming a bond with these people and hang out there quite a bit. Well, Chloe, the journalist's mother, her name is Morgan, and she works for H Plus Incorporated, which is this big corporation that I gathered works on a lot of military and government military contracts where they're developing technology and AI and this sort of thing, that this sort of transhuman technology, but for kind of evil purposes, right? Because of the military and stuff. And so Morgan, as it turns out, I don't want to give too much away, but Morgan, she has decided to leave this or this corporation that sort of goes on the run, and she has destroyed her research, but she's taken a very important prototype called the Little Blackjack, which is this military grade sort of exo or robotic technology thing, which Jake, I guess I'll give away. It's not really a spoiler because it's not really pertaining to the story so much, but the little boy ends up in this little body. So, that sort of sets the stage for the adventure that's come. So Chloe's boyfriend, Angelo, I didn't mention him, but he has a military background, and he gets recruited through a series of events into this elite sort of paramilitary police force organization. So they kind of become at odds. But this paramilitary sort of police force goes after the Little Blackjack, goes after this group that Morgan, the person who used to work at H Plus Incorporated, they're going after what research, where is the research, but mainly they want to recover this prototype of the Little Blackjack, and that sets the stage for the adventure of the book. And it was quite a page turner. So, when I read at the very end of the book, it did say that Gary Dejean, the author, had a PhD in film studies, and that from what I gathered, this book was a novelization of a screenplay. I don't know that I've ever read a novelization of a screenplay. I have read a screenplay, adaptation of a novel, but I'm not sure I've ever read the other way around. But this really did read like a movie. So it really, the chapters, sort of sets a scene for you, and then you have the action of that scene that unfolds before you. And so this really was conducive to kind of a page turner there towards the last, definitely the last fourth to half, where there's in pursuit of the paramilitary group is in pursuit of the technology, and so that part was really super fun. I don't know if I mentioned, but this book doesn't really ask the big questions like, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean what would it feel like really to go in? If you were this boy, what would it feel like to go into this military grade sort of body? The little boy doesn't seem to have much difficulty adjusting to something like that, but I think, it would be hard for a lot of people to have this adjustment away from what we know of as human into something else that's that we have never experienced before. The eyesight we've never experienced, the hearing we've never experienced, the ability to understand our space, spatially, to understand it differently than we have evolved naturally, biologically, to be able to understand it. So also just to be able to run so fast and to do these types of things, that superhuman things, really, H plus things, humanity plus type things, right? So these kinds of books are kind of interesting for me to explore. So I did enjoy reading the book from that standpoint. So so I think that's everything that I wanted to say about H Plus Incorporated by Gary Dejean. So I will be reading, eventually in the future, other transhuman stories. If anybody runs across any stories that pertain to transhumanism or this sort of how humans engage with technology or are changed by technology, let me know. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you have any suggestions along those topics for future reading. So what am I currently reading? Let me just pull up the cover here. I am reading Look Homeward, Angel by Thomas Wolfe. Yeah, I am about. I'm probably getting close to 3/4 of the way through this. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of the way through. Look Homeward, Angel by Thomas Wolfe. This has had some really beautiful writing in it, and then some really show-stopping, cringe-inducing, gasping aspects to it that I'll discuss more when I do the chat. This book was originally published back in the 1920s. I'm unsure of the exact year. It was considered a Southern literary sort of phenomenon at the time, and this author, Thomas Wolfe, was a very highly thought of author during this era. But the book's got some issues that I'll talk about, like I said, when I do the chat. So I won't go into it here yet until I finish up the whole book. So I'll have a chat on that coming up very soon. What I'm going to read next, I'm not really 100% sure. So, a lot of times when I fall in my chats, I'll end with what my planned next read is going to be. I have several in mind, but I don't know yet. So I won't say because I'm not real sure. So just stay tuned. It'll be a surprise, okay? Until next time, take care. Bye.